On Valentine's Day, Eric Anderson went into work like any other day. As a biological science technician for the National Park Service, Anderson spends most of his days at the Indiana Dunes National Park. When he's not at the dunes, he's out in the field setting up prescribed burn units across the Great Lakes region. This upkeep reduces the risk of fast-spreading wildfires. He's been with the Park Service since 2021 and has felt secure in his role, but this all quickly changed at the beginning of last month. He started hearing unsettling news. Some of his colleagues had been laid off or were outright fired. Naturally, he began worrying about his future.
We knew that there was something in the works. We knew that they had asked park superintendents to send any of their probational employees, send that information up the chain. And I knew that they were also making the case that, no, we really need to keep these people. They're essential to our program. We can't lose these folks. And I was suspicious that, yeah, we know what's going to happen. We know they're going to start calling employees. And as soon as the fork in the road email that was sent out to everyone saying, we're at a fork in the road, you can voluntarily retire now and get your full salary up through September. When the court discussions on that finally ended and allowed them to then close that offering, so it extended like a couple of weeks past, then the next day is when they started the firings.
And on the 14th of February, these measures, led by the newly created Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, hit Anderson firsthand.
I went into work. I didn't bring a lunch with me to work that day because I'm like, I don't know if I'm even going to be able to eat this today. I said to my supervisor in the morning, I said, if it comes and it comes to you and you find out, just tell me. Don't sugarcoat it. Again, faithful employees, civil servants, we're there and we're following rules. And when they tell us to do stuff, then that's what we do. Around 3:00 it came. The cover is like, you're being terminated. And attached are the letters saying with all the information. And it's like, are you kidding me? You're just going to fire me by email. You're not even going to have someone come in and say, I truly expected it to be given to my supervisor and said, Eric, we have to let you go. But no, it was just fired via email. So that was really frustrating.
The email came from a Department of Interior official who claimed that Anderson had failed to meet performance standards. This directly conflicted with a recent evaluation he had undergone, where he received word that he'd exceeded expectations. For Anderson, he's left feeling confused and frustrated, and he's far from alone.
We have 2.4 million federal employees, and they work in all these different departments. And a lot of the services that people in the public, the Americans, receive in the way of benefits and other kinds of services come from these federal programs. And so what the Trump administration wants to do is diminish the budget and the size of these federal departments, which means the massive layoffs and firings of significant high number of employees, which will impact your ability to get these services. And that's why it's more than just employees losing their jobs. I think the whole country is impacted by it.
That's Victor Narrow, a professor of labor studies and project director for the University of California, Los Angeles Labor Center. Narrow says that many of the firings and layoffs target probationary employees like Anderson, who are either new hires or have been recently promoted within their agency and are still in a trial period. But the cuts may not stop there. Other employees could find themselves on the chopping block in a matter of months.
There was a memo issued by the Office of Management and Budget. It was a memo to all the federal departments that they had to submit a work plan of how they're going to downsize and decrease their workforce and how they plan to implement that work plan by September 30th. Because our layoffs now are with probationary employees. Every department has a probationary employee system. It ranges from a few months to a year. Those have been the layoffs, a notification to the probationary employees that your probation period is ended, you're no longer necessary, you're terminated. But what he's talking about now is by September 30th, they need to begin the implementation of a plan to go beyond the probationary employees, the actual employees, to downsize.
Agencies like the National Park Service play a crucial role in America, so why are they being downsized? Since the early 20th century, there have been movements to create a smaller federal government. President Ronald Reagan also tried to reduce the federal workforce in the 80s, but was unsuccessful. Today, these reductions are being pushed by the Department of Government Efficiency, which is overseen by tech billionaire Elon Musk. The department's aim is to cut wasteful government spending, and they claim their efforts have already saved the U.S. $65 billion. However, the accuracy of this number has already been called into question by many experts. According to Musk, these savings will bring down the national debt, reduce inflation, and even lower taxes. However, Narrow argues that these cuts don't just impact government workers, but will funnel down and lead to issues for all Americans when critical agencies become underfunded and understaffed.
Like Medicaid and other similar departments that offer services, you have a decrease in employees. You're going to have a decrease in the quality of the services. People are going to have to wait longer. People are going to have limited hours to go and get their services. And that's an impact then on the needs that we have, our quality of life, our needs that we have, depending on the kind of services that you're always relying on. That's another major impact. And I think that's a significant impact that goes beyond just the employment status of the federal employees.
Anderson is also worried about America's future in the midst of these big cuts. Like many Park Service employees who work on prescribed burn units, he had a red card, meaning he could be pulled in to fight fires across the U.S. in a time of emergency. For instance, if needed, he would have been called on to help with the recent Los Angeles fires. As many with this experience are now out of jobs, he fears what could happen the next time a disaster hits.
When we're in a wildfire season where it's not just one small area of the country where wildfires are breaking out, think back to a couple of years ago when, well, even this last year, California was on fire in many places. Oregon was on fire. Idaho was on fire. Colorado was on fire. And all of the regular fire forces, fire people that do primary fire, all the hotshot crews, they were all busy. They were all like tied in. There's a shortage of people. So that's when they move up what's called the planning level. So they basically the emergency planning level for the country. So we were up at PL5, which is the highest level. And that's more of like an administrative code. So when the planning level is that height, that basically says anyone who works within federal entities, federal agencies that is red carded, they can now be activated and brought in to help because this is an all hands on deck situation. Many of the folks that were fired through these actions were the fire militia. So what's that going to mean for wildland fire season this year? I don't know.
For let-go employees like Anderson who disagree with the government's decision, there is an option to appeal through the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board. But with so many cases flooding the system all at once, the agency is backlogged. To make matters worse, the board itself has been subject to downsizing and budget cuts, only worsening Anderson's and others' chances of getting their jobs back.
They have the Merit Systems Protection Board to file a complaint, and then it's heard by an investigator, and it goes before the administrative judge. The problem with that is it can take anywhere from a few months to a year for you to get your cases heard. The Trump administration has terminated employees in that board, and he's downsizing that budget. So this board, which is the only avenue for federal employees to file a complaint, is now being diminished itself. So it's going to create backlogs. Normally, employees doesn't want to wait that long, so they just leave and move on to another job in the private sector or maybe a state government job.
Despite issues with the board, a federal judge in California has temporarily paused the mass firings, calling the Trump administration directives illegal. One upside is that several agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and U.S. Department of Agriculture, have reversed many of these firings, reinstating thousands of workers. As these legal challenges make their way through court, cutting government spending still remains a top priority for the Trump administration. But beyond policy debates and court battles, losing a job can be incredibly devastating. No matter the paycheck or position, Anderson reminds us that it's a difficult period for him and many other Americans who are trying to pick up the pieces.
I've been working as an ecologist and a forester, mostly in the private sector since about 2006 or so, 2007, something like that. And I made a decision. I made a career change to say, I'm going to put all in with the National Park Service. I took a significant pay cut for the trajectory I was going on in my career, noting that I would have security and I could be focusing on the mission of taking care of America's parks. And I wanted that mission and that responsibility. And now, as I'm starting to look for other positions, man, when you work for a mission base and a mission focus, your heart really has to be in there. But it's really hard to fall in love with something that isn't what you were doing or the trajectory that you were working toward. It's rough, it's also at a time where, fortunately, I didn't have to move. I didn't have to uproot and leave, but I do live in Chicago, and it's freaking expensive to live in Chicago, and to not have income is pretty serious.
To find out more about Eric Anderson, Victor Naro, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galante. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.